1967, Delco Products got involved and built an electric drive using a DC series motor plus my chopper concept. In 1968, Delco Products delivered this electric drive to General Motors Defense Research Laboratories, specifically to Frank Pavlik's, who at that time was a project engineer.
I have spoken of our friend John Werth in previous episodes. Most noteworthy of his accomplishments is the creative design of the General Motors high-performance electric drive patent. He's in wonderful health and still exercises every single day and takes very good care of himself and his wife Josephine. Like many of the men in our story, John comes from war-torn Europe during the time of World War II. Their stories resonate so much with me, I feel the need to tell the background story of their lives, so their memory can live in historic record permanently. John was born in 1927 in the Saar region, a coal mining area tucked between Western Germany and Eastern France. His mother was French, and his father was German and was also a lawyer. During this time, the region was controlled by France under a League of Nations mandate. He had a German-speaking Swiss governess when he was 2 years old and a French-speaking one when he was 4 years old. He was the oldest of 4 siblings, 3 boys and a girl, and also had an older, illegitimate half-sister from his father's World War I romance. The Treaty of Versailles called for a referendum in 1935 to allow for the Saarlanders to choose between France, Germany, or independence. His father headed a group that vigorously opposed the Nazi option. This campaign would ultimately fail, and when it did, his father relocated the entire family to a Paris suburb and gained French citizenship. He attended elementary and middle school in Versailles, which required a 5-mile bicycle ride to and from school every day. In 1939, World War II erupted in Europe. In 1940, Hitler was able to invade France with surprising ease. The family fled with only enough possessions to fill an automobile and rented a home in Karnak. When the German army caught up with them in June of 1940, relocation was necessary to avoid the execution of his father and uncle. He attended the Limoges High School for a year and a half until Hitler threatened the south of France in 1942, and the family decided to leave Europe permanently. His parents bribed the Cuban consulate in Lyon and obtained visas to Havana in 1941. When they finally arrived via ship in Cuba, they were detained at an internment camp because of improper paperwork. An additional bribery took place and they were released. The journey to Cuba from France aboard a ship had been a long one, and John had studied Spanish for preparation during the trip. He was enrolled in a private Catholic school, the Colegio de la Salle.
My parents and our family moved to Cuba in 1941, late 1941, to get away from the war. Things were a big mess in France in 1941. It was right after the invasion, during and after the invasion. So I ended up graduating high school in Cuba in a Cuban private high school.
It is here that his new teachers, the Christian brothers, taught him reasonably fluent Spanish. He was brought underneath the wing of the teachers, and in his 4th year of high school studied advanced mathematics and learned for his lifelong love of science.
My high school teacher in Havana, who was actually French originally, but he spoke Spanish, said that whoever discovers a way to make an electric car work as efficiently as an ordinary car will become famous. So I had a bug on that. I figured if I'm going to come up with an electric car, I'm going to have to study electrical engineering. So I did.
He would graduate at the top of his class and even earn the top grade in his Spanish class, a language that he had just begun to learn 2 years earlier. In the fall of 1943, at the age of 16, he enrolled for a semester at the University of Havana Engineering School. He was scheduled to depart for the United States in 1944, and because of his age, he was not allowed to matriculate through his courses. He could listen and take the exams, but they wouldn't count towards college credit. Upon reaching the United States, he enrolled for a semester at Fordham in New York City and another semester at Manhattan College in Riverdale. After these 2 semesters, he joined the U.S. Army and was shipped to Le Var, France. He had aced the Army's IQ test, and because of his fluent French and German, he was assigned to the Army's 970th Army Counterintelligence Unit. He was tasked with catching Soviet spies and Nazi war criminals. In 1946, he was sent to the European Theater Intelligence School.
Okay, it's called the European Theater Intelligence School, ETIS. He was in a beautiful Bavarian town, and they had a bunch of buildings there, the temporary buildings. They're probably old German army barracks, which they turned into classrooms. And there were instructors from the army, from all over the army, people who were highly skilled in intelligence and counterintelligence, and they taught us how to be a good intelligence agent, or in my case, counterintelligence agent. And as I said, one of them was Henry Kissinger.
He was a private first class and shared studies with men that ranked as high as colonels. He would enjoy instructors as famous as Henry Kissinger and graduate valedictorian. In 1947, he was promoted and became the youngest Army officer in Europe at the time. He finished his tour of duty and joined the Intelligence Reserve in New York. He graduated from Manhattan College with a degree in electrical engineering in 1951 and married the love of his life, Josephine Vidal. The 2 of them had met at a dance at the Biltmore Hotel in Manhattan.
And around that time is when I met Josephine at a CYO dance. I went to that dance for the first time. She went to it for the first time with some girlfriends. And a mutual acquaintance introduced us, and we sort of hit it off. And then we danced, of course. We were both avid dancers. She's a better dancer than I am, but it was pretty fair. And I started speaking Spanish with her. And she tells me that she was very impressed with the fact that I, being a gringo, could speak fluent Spanish.
And have been ballroom dancing the night away ever since. We can personally attest to this. A few months prior to their wedding at the little church around the corner, in New York's financial district, John got hired by ArmaCorp, a military contractor. This is where a large world becomes much smaller, because Donald Friedman and Sam Romano were also employed there. It was there that these men helped design the very first intercontinental ballistic missile, the Atlas. The ArmaCorp would lose the bid for the successor to the program of the Atlas, the Titan ICBM. After that, these 3 men took employment at Avion.
It was a small company in North Jersey, Paramus, New Jersey, whose claim to fame was that they worked with Howard Wilcox, who was a Channel 8 at the time, to develop and reduce to practice the Sidewinder missile. And Don Friedman was the lead engineer at Avion for that project. He, together with Wilcox in California, did an amazing job of testing, building, designing that Sidewinder missile at an unbelievably low cost.
During this time, John and Josephine would have a son and a daughter, John Kelvin and Amanda Joanne. The 3 men were rapidly promoted at Avion and would become close friends. Don recognized John's creative ability when he was a lab director for infrared military systems. Don Friedman would help him immensely, and those 3 men walked out the proverbial door to the new General Motors defense systems.
Don Friedman?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, we were lifetime friends.
And
I was a close friend of Sam Romano as well. Right. But Don Friedman, of course, was my boss, and I had very high respect for him, as I did, of course, for Howard Wilcox. Evie Wilcox, Howard Wilcox's widow, Howard and she visited us here several times, and she socialized quite a bit with Josephine. Oh, well, Marge Romano was here just earlier this year. We saw Rachel Friedman last year. Josephine and I went to Santa Barbara on a trip a couple of years ago, and we saw Don Friedman. We saw Sam and Marge, of course. We also saw Frank Pavlik's and a couple of other people who had not really been co-workers of mine, but who were part of the same tight-knit group.
They moved to Michigan and were transferred the following year to Santa Barbara, California, where their work would begin under the new name General Motors Defense Laboratories. John assigned him the job of creating an electric drive system for vehicular applications. Using the self-proclaimed motto of full torque at any speed, he initially based it upon pre-existing state-of-the-art electrical components for speed of application purposes.
A moment when I thought this would work, the beginning of 1961. Electric motors were never intended to develop full torque at any speed. Only with my control system could an electric motor do things that basically it didn't want to do.
This design would eliminate the need for a transmission altogether. But most notably, Howard Wilcox would recognize him as one of the two most creative men at the General Motors Defense Laboratories. That's a tall order, because over 600 men were employed in these divisions at that time.
And he and I, philosophically and otherwise, and scientifically, were on the same wavelength. Probably, he once told me something that I thought was very flattering. He told me that among the 500 or so scientists and engineers at the Defense Research Laboratories in Santa Barbara, there were basically only 3 whom he considered to be creative. And he said Arnold Nortzik, who specialized in gyroscopes, and the other one was me, and the third one was he himself. Concept actually ended up on the moon. That was very gratifying. So I spoke to one of the engineers, Frank Pavlik's in Santa Barbara, and he briefed me on and described this concept to me, along with the concept of the entire lunar rover electric drive.
In 1970, at approximately the same time as lunar vehicle research was being wound down, John left General Motors for Exide Battery. He was promoted rapidly, and in 1971 became a laboratory manager.
I was hired by a man by the name of Galen Freisinger, who had some contacts with me about electric drives in particular. And he must have been a little bit impressed anyway, so that he contacted me in 1970 and asked me to come and work for him in Yardley, Pennsylvania, where there was a lab owned by Exide, the Exide Battery Company. So he hired me in 1970, and I worked at ESB for close to 10 years. We were working on fuel cells and electric drives.
It was there that John created and developed many advanced batteries for electric vehicle applications. John and his wife Josephine would settle down during this time in Princeton, New Jersey, where they have lived in the same beautiful home ever since. In 1980, he left Exide Battery Corp. For Engelhard Corporation. This is where he would continue his early work that was utilized in the Electrovan that's housed at the General Motors Heritage Center. These further advances included the ability to create hydrogen in a fuel cell-powered car without carrying a tank load of hydrogen on board.
Electrovan was built to determine the problems that face fuel cells when we try to use them in a car, just as Electrover 2 was built to develop motors and controls. Many of these problems are the same, regardless of the type of fuel or fuel cell used.
He worked there for 10 years before being offered a position as chief scientist at H-Power, a move that included his boss from the Engelhard Corporation. He would work there for 3 years until his retirement at the age of 66. During the golden years of his retirement, John bought junk bonds in the height of the Great Recession in 2009. This resulted in his well-deserved fortune that is currently putting grandchildren through college, and long, elaborate vacations to exotic destinations with the love of his life, Josephine. May the two of them dance the night away forever.